double check, make sure it looks like it's showing up. Yes, we're there. Okay. So, where is my cheat sheet? There it is. Okay, so very excited to have Johanna Rothman with us today. She's known as the pragmatic manager and offers frank advice for your tough problems. She helps leaders and teams learn to seize practical alternatives that help them achieve more agility in their work. With knowledge, they can choose what and how to adapt their product development. With her trademark practicality and humor, Johanna is the author of more than 20 books about many aspects of product development, including program, project, and portfolio management. Her most recent book, Effective Public Speaking: How to Use Content Marketing with Stories to Show Your Value, which we were just talking about. We need to look for a Kickstarter soon. The book she's discussing today is Project Life Cycles: How to Reduce Risks, Release Successful Products, and Increase Agility. In addition to her Pragmatic Manager newsletter, Johanna also blogs on jrothman.com and on createadaptablelife.com. And I am going to throw those links in the chat for everyone in just a second, but I will turn that over to you. Thank you so much. Looking forward to this today.
Thank you very much. And I think, Mark, you will have to interrupt me when you see questions in the chat, because I have not figured out how to pop the chat open. So that's fine. I welcome your interruptions. Okay, so let's talk about Agile and agility. And note that the Agile in capital letters and quotes, because Agile was originally an adjective, right? Agile development, agile planning, agile something else that was an action that you would put after agile. However, what I see a lot of, instead of this frequent learning, is I see an enormous number of commitments. So I see long and extensive backlogs and roadmaps. Teams become feature factories, right? Oh, we want the team to do this thing, whether or not it has any relevance to the product under development. So I find that also leads to little or no experimentation. The more we have these long and extensive backlogs and roadmaps, the less opportunity we have to include experimentation into our backlogs and roadmaps. And if you think about a roadmap, right? You're driving your car or you have your GPS application open and you're walking, especially in a strange city, and you encounter some kind of road I was going to say destruction, but that's what it is in the summer. We have road destruction here. I live outside Boston. We have, during the warmer months, we destroy roads to put them back together for the winter months. So we often have detours, right? We know what to do with detours in our normal lives. We find another path. But in on all these very long and extensive backlogs, we have no room for detours. How can we evolve the strategy? Well, we cannot. That means we have lots of late changes to what we thought we needed, but we started to offer it to customers and they said, well, you gave us what we asked for. It's not what we need. So that all points to teams under tremendous pressure. There's no joy. There's no ease. It's a grind, a daily grind to finish my stuff so you can finish your stuff. And that's actually the reason very few of us can really achieve agility. When we focus on my stuff and your stuff, no team can deliver fast enough. And what happens? Managers still want more and they want it now, but we cannot do that as part of the team. Now, I say that culture is the root cause of this. Notice I talked about my stuff and your stuff. That's an example of resource efficiency thinking, where our managers focus on our individual actions or deliverables instead of the team's actions or deliverables. So think about this in your organization? Well, just in your team. Is your team more based on resource efficiency, where the work assignment comes in, then you do your part and then hand it off to the next person? They do their part, they hand it off to the next person. They do their part, they hand it off to the next person, etc., etc. And if you're at the end, you feel as if you're under tremendous pressure. Worse, every single handoff has a delay. And I don't know how long that delay is for your team, but just think about it. How many times have you waited to do code review or design review? Because sometimes we need to do design review, and sometimes we need to do some kind of interim testing before the system testers get the work. And there's almost always a delay because there's almost never enough testers if you separate people by their expertise until the end until the end of the work. So this resource efficiency thinking is anti-agile, right? Anti-agility. What we need is flow efficiency thinking, where we work as a team to finish our work, not our part, but our work. Instead of focusing on activities, we focus on deliverables. This is a change in culture, and we need this change in culture to actually be able to create agility in our teams. Now, this is almost always due to the rewards, because the rewards in our organizations drive the organizational structure, because they say what we value is what we reward, right? Even if the managers say, well, people are our greatest value. Well, only if you're one of these special people with the right expertise. I have always been too short, too female, and too outspoken to be one of these special expertise people. I can always stuck my head up above the crowd and said, "Why are we doing things this way?" Yeah, great for a consultant, not so great for somebody inside the organization. Well, not somebody in an organization focused on resource efficiency. So you have options, right? While your managers might reward resource efficiency, and you're not ever going to get to what I call true agility, you have many ways to help incorporate agility into everything you do as a team. So let me talk first about risks. Every single risk drives choices for the feedback loop duration. I really like this image because I think this is exactly what product development feels like to me. We start off with something, and then we say, oh, this implies this choice over here and this choice over there, and then there's a feedback loop over there, and then all these other things imply choices over there. So I have organized all of these choices into three major kinds of risks: project risks, product risks, and portfolio and organization risks. Those allow us to make reasonable choices for the duration of our desired feedback loops. And if we don't like the choice we made just now, we can change our minds. We can change what we do and how we do it. So let me first talk about project risks. I have used a project pyramid since I wrote Manage It, Your Guide to Modern Pragmatic Project Management. That was back in the O's. And I realized that we did not have a three-legged stool or a four-legged stool. We had inside the project risks, which are feature set, the date, the time to release, and the quality, the low defects. And then there's everything on the outside, which is what the organization thinks they can they can design it in advance. That's the work environment, people and their capabilities, and the cost of release. However, only one thing can drive your project. One, not two, not three, just one. And if you start to think about what really drives your project, often it's either the date or the feature set. Sometimes it's the quality and the load defects, but it's almost always one of these, because those are what your customers want. And one of those, because then you can have a couple of constraints, not more than two. Maybe you have to manage the cost to release. Maybe you're not going to really get any more people. We have a very bounded project. In that case, you really need to manage the feature set and the date. And then all the other three can float. And you actually have choices for how to manage those floating constraints and risks. So really think about what drives your project, what two things might constrain your project, and then all the other aspects of the project pyramid, those risks, will help you decide what kind of a feedback loop you need for your project. I'm going to take a drink of water. All right, now let's talk about product risk. How much innovation do you need for your product? Most of us are in this messy middle, right? We have some need for innovation. We know a whole bunch about what we already know, but we are not innovating every single thing all the time at every level. However, we have some supposedly totally deterministic projects, or I should say products. So one of my clients was doing a port from old hardware to new hardware. Now you might think this is a totally deterministic product, right? How much learning could we possibly need to move from old hardware to new hardware? Well, you guessed it. In the middle of the port, they realized that this whole section of code with all this very interesting reasoning and delivery into the customer experience had to change based on the new hardware. No one had expected that. When I said that's kind of like nobody expecting the Spanish Inquisition, and I realized not everyone knows about Monty Python anymore. Sorry if you do not know Monty Python, but if you do know Monty Python, you should look for Nobody Expects the Spanish Inquisition, because that's exactly what happened to this project. All of a sudden, they moved from a totally deterministic approach to needing a whole lot of agility. They had not expected this at all. So in the middle of this totally deterministic project, they realized they needed a whole lot of agility, which meant discovering and learning and discovering and learning and experimentation and learning. They moved from long feedback loops to very, very short feedback loops. So I do not know what your project is and what your product is. Most of us do not live in totally non-deterministic products. Most of us live in this messy middle where, to be honest, if you don't learn something for a week, it's probably not the end of the world, but only learning every week is probably too long for a successful product to live inside what drives your project, right? That's how the product risks interact with the project risks. Now, then there are all the portfolio risks. I did an assessment several years ago for a small organization that was producing school-based software. And they had certain times of the year where they really could not change the product, right? The product was not going to change from about the end of August, middle of August, until sometime in the late fall, because the teachers really needed to learn how to use the product. And then they had another opportunity for change starting in the late fall until after the Christmas rush, just before so students came back in January. And then they had all summer to change everything they wanted to. Well, until the middle of August. So they had intermittent portfolio changes where they could change a whole lot of things, but they really needed to manage when they were done with all of those changes. And the people managing the project portfolio wanted to change the feature set faster than the teams could finish their work. So if you want more change at the portfolio level, the teams have to be able to finish faster. So all of this, the teams had been working for so long on, well, we kind of locked down this product from the middle of August until late in the fall, so we don't need feedback loops. But they did. They needed internal feedback loops, not external feedback loops. So really think about how much stability do you have for the portfolio decisions, whether they are inside the company or outside the company, right? Because all of those portfolio decisions change based on when you can release to the customer. And the faster the portfolio risks, well, the faster the portfolio decisions, the faster the team need. Let me say this in more English. Sorry. The more frequent the portfolio decisions, the faster the team's feedback loops need to be. I guess I could have read that. Oh well. But really think about your life cycle choice when you have portfolio risks. And anytime the managers want to decide faster than the teams, you know you have a team-based problem for agility, right? The team's cycle time is way too long for what the team needs to deliver. Now, that's often because managers have not decided on the portfolio, and the flow metrics will show you the larger the WIP, the longer it takes for cycle time, the larger the WIP, right? So I think I have an image that describes that later. So really think about all of these risks as you think about your feedback loops. So the more risks you have everywhere, the shorter your feedback loop duration needs to be, right? If you have people, senior leaders who say, well, I want 3 out of 6. Well, at first, they're not going to get 3. But the less likely they are to decide on the project risks, the more risks you have overall, and the shorter the feedback loops need to be. And the more non-deterministic your product is, the shorter the feedback loops need to be. The more the managers cannot decide on their portfolio, the shorter the feedback loops need to be, right? So in every single case, really think about how short can your feedback loops be. Now, I want to ask a little question about your collaboration to enable agility. Mark, this is going to work in the chat, right?
Yeah, people could just type a number in, or
Okay.
do you want me
Yeah,
to set up
type a
a
number.
thing for? Okay.
Okay, thank you. So, and I will figure out how to see the chat. I'm sure there's a way. So, on a scale of 1 to 5, one, everyone works alone unless there's an emergency. 5, the team always collaborates on everything. 3 is we collaborate on urgent issues. And let me see if I can see. I can see the chat now. Okay. Going to. I see a bunch of I see a 5 and a 4 and 3s and 2s and 3s, 5s, 2s, 4, 3, 2, 4, 5, 3.5. Yeah. I see a lot of this in teams really working on their agility, where they start off collaborating on urgent issues, and then they move to sometimes people work alone, right? That then once they realize collaboration actually enables a whole lot of their agility, and it's actually more fun to work that way, they move from really sometimes people working together to sometimes people working alone. So I think that I've seen you folks are ranging from mostly twos and threes to some fours and fives, which is a lot of what I see in my clients. The more, the more, the higher this number, the more agility your team is creating in your team, right? Nobody said, "Oh, you must use collaboration." They probably said, how fast can we get this thing?" And you probably said, "Oh, if we stop working alone," that notion of resource efficiency, we are much more able to collaborate. And that's really the first key to enabling agility. Let's see if I can, yeah. So let me talk a little bit about life cycles. You have seen serial life cycles, and the reason this started is actually, well, in case you're not sure, it's we do requirements, then we do analysis, then design, then code, then integration, then test, then release. And this is all due to a pagination error in Winston Royce's seminal paper about life cycles. He had this on the first page, and then on page 2, we said, "This looks great and never works." Right? He actually had all kinds of feedback loops all over. Now you might have heard this as waterfall, as staging, as phases, but what you often do is a whole lot of planning up front and then think it's a simple matter of execution. That was an eye roll in case you could not see it. There is never any simple matter of execution as in any kind of product development. Never, 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 never. So what I often see is the reality for too many of these supposedly agile teams. You might get into requirements hell, where you start doing the requirements, and then you do analysis and design and code, and even into integration, and you realize, oh my God, we have more requirements. Well, of course you do. Of course you do. Because until you actually implement anything, that's the integration and often the testing, no one sees where this project is going. I still meet a whole lot of teams that really want freezes. Um, Freezes are always slush. And I never understood why any agile team wants a freeze. If you are delivering something at least every other day, or at least every other week, you are delivering reality, not thinking about freezing and slush and whatever it was supposed to be. The reason your organization wants to see freezes is because your finance people are trying to capitalize the product. Agility, real agility, where you actually deliver something, allows you to capitalize every single time you deliver something. You don't have to have a freeze and do delivery, right? And then wait for delivery. No, you can capitalize your product as you deliver it. Now, here's the thing. All these, anytime you use any kind of a stage gate or waterfall or serial approach, you have unplanned feedback loops. And right, you start the requirements, you even get back into tests and then say, oh my God, we have changes in requirements. So wouldn't you rather learn that early? I did not put in all of the feedback loops here because I do not have that much patience. Those of you who know me know I do not have anywhere near that much patience. But there are many, many more feedback loops here. And it does not matter where you are in a serial approach, you will have feedback loops. So I want planned feedback loops and frequent feedback loops and short feedback loops, not these ridiculously long feedback loops. So let me talk about the iterative lifecycle steps. Barry Bean came out with a spiral model. Evolutionary prototyping came out about in the 70s or 80s. SAFe is absolutely an iterative lifecycle until they start delivering. So the problem with an iterative lifecycle is it does not actually deliver anything until you finish prototyping. Now, there's more to this, but until you actually deliver anything, you might have the project kiss of death. That's where you keep refining prototypes and you keep refining and refining and refining. And until you finally deliver something, you might have what I call the project kiss of death. That means you need to go back to this prototype, finish it, and finishing might take a while until that's the first time you have anything you can deliver. So just iterating is not enough. Now, I talked about well, let me talk about these conditions where an iterative approach can work. If you get feedback from outside the team, this might work. Many, many years ago, I was working on not a port, but a brand new chipset that needed a new operating system. Right? We had a current operating system. This is back in the 80s, right? Nobody makes their own operating system now. I'm old. I have discerned all of this gray hair. But we were creating a new operating system for our new chipset. We asked people, our very trusted customers, to come in and say, could you use this as it is? All they wanted to do was get on the keyboard and play with it. And I said, okay, it's probably going to crash. And they said, that's fine. And we actually got a whole lot of really, really good feedback from them. Although it was just a prototype of what we thought was the final work. Now, if you actually throw away some of these prototypes, you might be able to then use them in a combination life cycle. I will talk about the combo life cycle in a bit after the incremental life cycles. So there are two lovely incremental life cycles. And I think most of you who are not really using agility are using these incremental life cycles. One is design to schedule, which focuses on release candidates, and stage delivery, which focuses on incremental releasing. I use these starting back in the 70s and 80s. They are not new. And the more time you take for requirements and analysis up front before you deliver anything, the more you have an incremental approach, not an agile approach. Now, somebody asked me recently on my blog, when do I advocate iteration zero? And I pointed them to my iteration zero blog post. And I said, I always want some kind of a delivery, even if it's just learning. So I talked more about the iteration zero in my Hudson Bay Start blog post. I believe, Mark, I gave you the link for that. Okay, so the real question is, do you have a release candidate or do you actually release? And I have always been very big on releasing. Now, back in the 80s, we did not do little bits of feature sets. No, we did the entire feature set. So if you are still doing an entire feature set where you do design, code, integrate, and test over every possible story in that feature set, you're still doing a stage delivery approach. This is much better than just an iterative approach, but it's not really agile in the sense of short feedback loops. That's because you might still get late feedback. And if you only have released candidates, you might have very, very late feedback where you have not actually delivered anything. In stage delivery, you can always release what you do have. So if you have released, 4 or 5 or 6 increments of value, even if you get to the final increment of value or final integration and you have this project kiss of death, maybe it's not the end of the world. But it's important to say, could we have done this better for the next time? That's so I was not smart enough in the 80s to have a retrospective at every release. You can learn from my mistakes. You can have a retro every single time you deliver something. You don't have to wait 2 weeks for a retro or however long your sprint is. As soon as you deliver something, you can have even a 20-minute retrospective and learn from what you did. Right? The double loop learning allows you to reduce the feedback loops in all of your work. So you can combine approaches. So if you have if you want an iterative approach and then have release candidates or releases, you can prototype what you know and then select an architecture. A lot of very large organizations are really uncomfortable with just delivering value in the first week. They really want to have an architecture, even if that architecture might be wrong. Okay, I consulted to an organization, a very large organization, back in about 2007 or 2008, when they used a 6-week time box, when they did not realize this was actually evolutionary prototyping, but that's what it was. They only got internal feedback first, and then they got customer feedback. They demoed every 6 weeks. And that's when they said, do we do more prototyping or do we possibly release this? And they actually found this very, very useful until they can move into regular 6-week time boxes. Now, the reason they hired me was because the 6-week time boxes were too long. And the program manager, who was a very sharp cookie, actually asked me, should we don't get everything done in these 6-week time boxes. What should we do? Should we extend them? I said, no, reduce them, because they had literally bitten off more than they can chew. This is what I see all the time in my Agile clients, right? The teams have all the stuff that they want to consider doing in the next 2 weeks. And that means they have this tremendous amount of work in progress. So instead of that, say, move to a 1-week iteration, move to no iterations, and decide when you will deliver every 2 days or every day. When I say that to people, they say, no iterations? And I said, if you collaborate as a team, how long would it really take you to deliver the largest story? And they say, well, not everyone will be utilized. Right, that's that resource efficiency thinking. I said, don't worry about utilization. How long would it really take to deliver a 25-point story? And they say, couple of days? And I say, yes, exactly, a couple of days. So the more you collaborate, right, where we rarely work alone, we only collaborate as a team, the faster your throughput, the shorter your feedback loops, and the happier your customers, and the happier your product leaders, because now they actually get feedback from the customers. So yeah, you can combine approaches. It does not matter if there's no real name for it. If you need a name, call it your company customized agile approach, right? Just own it. Okay, I will stop doing it. So let me talk a little bit about clarifying what I mean by agility. Every agile approach requires a collaborative cross-functional team. That team limits and ranks its width, which means you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not high, medium, low. If you are still doing high, medium, low, you have a real sit down with your product leader and say, what's number one? Only one number one thing. And then what's number two? Only one number two thing. And then what's number three? Only one number three thing. And then we can stop right there. We don't need to rank anything else until we finish these 1, 2, and 3. And then the product leader will probably say, but I have all this stuff. And you say, okay, yes, you do have all this stuff because all these people have all these great ideas, and we can only do 1, 2, or 3 things at a time. And now, I really like single piece flow for many of my new to really agile teams, but most teams cannot conceive of that. They are so accustomed to working alone, that I say, okay, 2 things. Let's see how we can collaborate on 2 things at a time, right? We have a 7 or 8 person team. We have 3 or 4 people on this one. We have 3 or 4 people on that one. They finish it all together. They come back. Then we don't need a stand up. They come back together when we're all done with these 2 things and get the next 2 things off the ranked backlog. Not prioritized, ranked. I have a blog post about that. Mark, I forgot to send that to you. Yes. Yeah. So I will talk some more about some of the comments in the chat. Now, every agile approach requires a frequent releasing for feedback and for the team to learn from what they did. This is one of the reasons I really like talking about agility in the team as opposed to agile. So really think about how can we have agility, not this funny name for things. So, and this is why I also say agile approaches are not life cycles. They have to be a cultural change. Or it's not a mindset or specific practices. And in fact, if I could get rid of one practice, it would be the stand up, because a stand up allows people to not collaborate. So, and definitely agile approaches are not a specific framework or method, because the larger teams need a different approach. Smaller teams need a different approach. The larger the organization, the more every team needs its own approach. When I wrote Agile and Lean Program Management, I said every team gets to decide its own agile approach as long as they are delivering as quickly as they possibly can, because the feedback loops matter much more than any kind of agile approach. A life cycle is a specific agile approach, and as I said, you can customize your own life cycle and call it your company name, custom agile approach, right? Those life cycles do not change as the team learns and adapts. Every agile approach needs to change as the team learns and adapts. Now, I am assuming every agile team works through the architecture to deliver, right? This is how the stories in the feature set gets done. That's my assumption. Now, if you have a component team, it's really hard to have agility. So here's how I recommend component teams work. Select the highest priority feature or feature set, and then choose one story. Design and code and integrate and test all the way through the architecture for that one story. Make sure you have a check-in of checking in as often as possible, and then release it. Then do that for the next story and the next story and the next story. I have a newsletter about this. Mark, I forgot to give that to you. I will I will find it at some point. And I think we can add more links when you post the video. Okay. But if you are unfortunate enough to have component teams, your check-in policy can allow delivering through the architecture. Now, there are two major Agile approaches. One is time-boxed, and the other is scope-boxed, right? Where you're really focusing on the scope of the work as opposed to the time of the work. Now, however you use an approach, I recommend against story points. I recommend against any kind of estimation. Instead, I should say predictive estimation. Instead, use your cycle time so you can figure out what you could put into a time box. And then you can say, based on our previous cycle time, we think this is about this long, right? Cycle time matters much, much more than any ideal time, which is what relative estimation is, right? Old gray hair, we used to have ideal time. That was relative estimation and wall time. And people used to say, oh, multiply by 2 and add 3. I mean, what kind of a manager used to say multiply by the team's effort and add 3? That was fudging the numbers. Instead of fudging the numbers, use cycle time. Right. That's your team's historic understanding of what they can deliver when. So stop with the fudging. Fudge is for dessert, not for estimation. I have to write that down on my blog. Okay. So when I think about how to choose a life cycle, and I'm not talking about an agile life cycle, the more risks you have, and the more overall risks, the more adaptability you need, the more agility you need. And the more project risks you have in terms of load defects and more features, the more you need an incremental or agile approach to see where you are now. Where are you in this project? Where are you in this product? If you have, and these are just general guidelines, if you really know what to do and you're really trying to finish something in a very short time frame, yeah, you can use a serial or incremental approach. But if you have a longer time frame, anything other than serial, and all those lead feedback loops, those are a clue for you to say, we are really doing a serial life cycle, not an agile approach. We do not have enough agility, and that's really a problem. So the longer the time frame that you want to plan for, the more adaptability you need. You need more adaptability in the backlog, the roadmap, and the product strategy, not just the corporate strategy. So the longer your managers want to plan for, the more agility you need in order to deliver. So it's actually a very interesting problem. So I'm going to talk about width limits shortly. In the chat, please see if you can use this number for your answer. Again, 1 to 5, we say 1 is we cannot ever limit width. We can't say no to anything ever. 5 is we always limit width. We finish what we started before taking new work. And number 3 is we try, but the urgent work interrupts us. I see some 4s and 5s. 3, 1, yeah. Team 4 portfolio 3, 3s, 4s, 2s. So those of you who are in the 1, 2, and 3 area, I think maybe using the flow metrics will help your managers understand why limiting width is maybe the first thing your team can do to enable agility. So the more when I say collaborate on fewer things, that means we have one team, not multitask individuals. And if you say, let's watch the work, not the people, that allows you to do value stream mapping. And then, of course, we can do a Hudson-based start instead of upfront planning. So let me talk about a few of these. I already talked about velocity is meaningless because measuring cycle time matters much, much more. So let me talk about Little's Law. The work in progress is a function of the cycle time times the team's throughput. I believe I have, oh, I don't. So the more WIP we have, the longer the cycle time, and then the slower the throughput. So if you are like me, you go to the grocery store, right? You find the shortest line, and somebody in front of you. I only go to the lines with under 12 things. Some guy in front of me has 15 things because he cannot count. Sorry, gentlemen. I see this mostly with men. Right? All of you ladies, I'm being misogynistic against men. Sorry, this does not happen to you all the time. I'm pulling my privilege here. So if you cannot count to 12 and you have 3 more items, that increases the work in progress for that line behind you. Now, it does not matter if you're using the self-checkout or you go to a poor person whose job is not to tell you you have more than 12 items, because that's just rude to the cashier, right? Don't do that. But then the work gets stuck behind this person. That's the aging. The number of people who can go through the line, the throughput is much lower. So the flow metrics show your reality and explain the collaboration in the WIP. And I believe, yeah. So Mark put the link in the notes. Thank you very much. Managers love burn down, velocity, and especially dashboards. Yes, because they can put them into tools that have absolutely no meaning. So the tools really do not show the reality. If you can put your cycle time in a tool, and I have a time series post on my blog. Mark, I don't think I gave that to you, but there's a time series that show where the cycle time might vary, and that's really the key from what managers need to really discover. Okay. So let me talk about the culture and project tips to increase agility. The more internal feedback you get in terms of demos, the more agility you will have, because that's where the product people can say, oh my goodness, we did not actually recognize what we asked for, and it's not really what we want. We also need customer feedback. So if you can do customer feedback as often as possible and retrospectives, that will allow you to increase agility. I really like to plan for shorter projects. So way back when many of my clients were a little bit allergic to the Agile word, they said, one of my very smart project managers said, well, I just take every single project they give me and divide it up into 4 smaller projects. And we release at the end of every single project. And I said, you are so smart. I'm stealing that from you. I had already done that, but I think it's really important to say, how can you as a project manager, whatever your title is, make a way to have smaller projects in your organization, and then deliver and demo. I always say, I always capitalize deliver and demo, because the more often you can deliver and demo, the more frequently you can have better feedback. both inside the team, with the product leader, with the customers, all of that. And that gets you accustomed to delivering and demoing more frequently every single time you can. So I'm really about less spinning and much more delivering will get you real agility. So agile is really not the point. But how often can you satisfy the customer with working product? Right? That will give you revenue and also allowing your finance people to capitalize the product. That requires collaboration and risk evaluation. Agility, well, when we first started with agile approaches, we all had a lot more joy and ease in our work. How can we get there again? Now, I'm gonna I've written a whole bunch of books. Thank you for thinking about them. Oh, I do have all these. Okay, let me Mark, do you want me to leave this up or do you want me to stop sharing so I can really look at the chat?
Why? So this is good. I'll tell you what, do you want to, we could paste these all quickly into the chat. Why don't you, do you want to just grab those, throw them in the chat, people can bring them up so they've got them when they're gone, and then you can see the chat. Does that work? Is
I
that
can
possible?
do that. I'm gonna come out of presentation mode
Awesome.
and then whoops. Yeah. I had sent some of these to Mark, but not all of them. There. Okay. I can
Perfect.
stop
That's great.
presenting. Okay. And now I can see the chat much, much better. Okay. Do you want to facilitate answering questions?
Yes. Does anyone have any questions? And if you do, if you want to type them in the chat, I can read them, or you just come up and ask your question directly, whatever works best for you. One thing I thought was particularly interesting. Richard.
Idea that the daily stand-up should be banned because it kind of encourages non-collaboration. I'd like to hear more about it. It sounds true, but I'm having trouble piecing it together.
Okay. So think about everyone working on their own story, right? That's the worst example of this. But say you have 5 people on the team and everyone is working on their own story. That means they have to have a stand-up to say who's doing what, who's in trouble, who has questions. Now let's imagine that everybody on a 5-person team, I often recommend slightly larger, but I have 5 fingers on my hand. Let's talk about 2 people on working on one item and 3 people working there, 3 on the other. If you are needing, if somebody has a question and they have to wait until the stand up to ask it, there's all kinds of delay in that. Right? Why are the 3 people not collaborating as in swarming on this one item? Right? Why not collaborate together and ask each other questions whenever they have questions? Does that make more sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. It kind of encourages not talking to each other except during that meeting, which kind of starts you down that path to not collaborating.
Right.
Yes, thank you.
I have worked with teams where when they came together for their daily stand-up, what one person said was that immediately after the last daily stand-up, they had a question. And so they waited till this stand-up to ask. I don't know what they did for those 24 hours, but that was the culture around the daily stand-up, was that's where we ask our questions. I mean, that was an extreme case, but I think what you're pointing out is if it encourages you to wait, it's not helping you. That's great. Very good point.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Like I said, you throw it in the chat, you can raise your hand, you just go off mute.
So I recognize George Dinwiddie. Hi, George. Mark, you
great
should
to
ask
see you.
George to speak.
So on the stand-up, one thing I did with one team was I put a with blue tape, I put a question mark in the middle of the team room on the floor. And so when anybody had a question, they were to go to that question mark, stand there,
Love
and
it.
ask the question of the room.
That's awesome.
See,
That's great.
This is why you should have George speaking at your meetup.
He
has
he's spoken before. We've been trying to get him again. So
all right, good.
yes, definitely. Okay, Marie asked, have you seen companies that align to their channels, website, retail, customer care, shared services, etc., but most of their large initiatives span across all of these areas? How do you begin to get more cross-functional across the channels?
Okay, so this is an issue of program management. If a project is trying to do this alone and a project manager is trying to do this alone, that's not sufficient. I wrote a whole book called Agile and Lean Program Management, describing what kind of teams shepherd the business value inside the technology area and inside for the entire organization. And Mark, if you want that at some point, I would be happy to talk about that. But this is not a project problem. This is much greater than one single project. And if the organization is not set up for this greater capability, it's not going to happen.
Cool. Did that help, Marie? Did you have any follow-up questions?
Yeah, I guess I would ask then, what do you recommend? Because the way that the teams are set up, it's by organization, and they're kind of creating their own silos. And it's hard to stop the delivery engine to pivot to something different. Even though the teams are running Scrum, the work intake is very waterfall.
So I would, if you are willing, set up a guerrilla-based program where you say, I need a product value team of all the product leaders across this program, and say, and I want you all to meet once a week to rationalize the product backlog for this program just for a week. Okay, if you need to do 2 weeks at a time, fine, but not more than 2 weeks at a time. Don't bother making any roadmaps; they'll all be wrong. I have a whole bunch of posts about the product value team, and I'm getting ready to start a new series when you don't have a product value team. But you need a product value leadership team across the program. They will drive the overall product value, and that's how you can kind of start off as guerrilla program management. And Maureen, if I just said a whole bunch of stuff that made no sense, please send me an email. I'm going to put that in the chat.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. I might need a follow-up on that. Thank you.
I think I said a lot of stuff that probably made no sense. I can write a blog